All right, Dave Collum, welcome back to the show. It's really good to see you again.
Yeah, it's good to see you. Good to see you again.
I just had to look it up. Our last interview with you was May of 2021, and a few things have
Hmm.
happened since then. Um,
Just a few, just
yeah,
some minor stuff. Just some
but
minor stuff.
but Dave, I have to pick up sort of where we left off. I don't know if it was the last thing we talked about, but I know I asked you last time you were here, like, what was your sort of new interest? What new topic were you sort of chasing down the rabbit hole? And if I'm not very much mistaken, it was the relationship between autism and vaccines. And I'm
Right.
wondering if you got anywhere with it, if you went, if you kept after it.
Well, I have. I actually, um, uh, the movie Vax, the documentary Vax, is very good.
Oh,
And I, uh,
facts. I'm gonna write that
I, I
down.
have a friend who has an adult autistic child, and he's a smart guy. Graduated University of Wisconsin, level-headed, and he made reference to the vaccine, and I knew the story, but I said, "Well, tell me about that." And so, what a lot of people don't know about the autism vaccine connection is they think that basically you're raising your kid and they're not progressing at the rate you like. It's pretty clear they're not going to Harvard, and so you start looking for someone to blame. That was sort of my view. I'd read some 2 million person study that said, look, it's a done deal. There's no connection here. And so I was told at that point I had faith in the FDA and had faith in the scientific method and things like that. Um, the movie Vax gets at a question that's far more acute, and that is that people whose kids get vaxxed that night they get sicker than hell. They get a spiking fever, and the next day the kid's just gone completely. They are now fully autistic. And that's something that would be hard to confuse, right? That's like drop a brick in your foot, it hurts. Do it again, it hurts.
Hmm.
And there are thousands of people who tell exactly this story. My son got sicker than crap, and the next day they were not functional, and it never came back. And so this friend of mine made reference to the vax without me prodding. It just popped out, and I said, "Tell me about the vax." He said, "Well, my son got vaccinated, and that night he got sicker than hell, and then the next day he was just intellectually missing." And he said I had to sleep in a closet with him with mattresses on the walls so he could get to sleep without smacking his head against the wall. The community says, well, there were symptoms, you just didn't see them. Tell a parent that they don't see something coming like that, right? That's
Hmm.
just insane, because we know every inch of that kid, right? We dote on them. If the kid goes from progressing at 18 months to not functional the next day, it's over, right? The story's done. And so I told a student that one day, and he went to the Mayo Clinic site and said, well, there is such a thing as, rapid onset autism. And I go, did they explain it? He said, no. And I said, if it was the vaccine, would they admit it? And he said, no. And I said, there you go. Um, and so I think that I think there's a window of opportunity where if you get the vaccine at a certain age, it's very dangerous. The MMR vaccine, I think there's about a 6 month window where you do not want to be giving that vaccine to your kid, and it's around 18 months. I'd look it up. I wouldn't depend on my recollection of the window, but in Europe, they vaccinate kids. They give them 3 vaccines in childhood, and in the U.S., they give them 72.
72.
Yeah, 72. So I've been reading about vaccines before I got onto this story.
Whoa.
And I had formulated the opinion. I've been reading about immunology, and I've been formulating the opinion that it's not good to invade a nubile um, immune system that aggressively with that many, just bombarding them, carpet bombing them with antigens, right? So I had come to the conclusion that the vaccines were being too aggressive, but not worse than that before I got into the whole vaxxed story.
Hmm.
Um, and then I was watching a video. I was reading about immunology, ironically and coincidentally, the year before COVID showed up. And I watched a woman give a talk on a TED Talk. She talked about the polio vaccine, and she said, we've been vaccinating kids in Africa for 15 years. What I'll tell you is the live attenuated vaccine is much better than the dead vaccine. And then she explained it as the dead vaccine attenuates the live vaccine attenuates a better immune response, and it gives you sort of an immunity to other diseases as well, which I couldn't quite understand. He said, look, none of these kids are dying of polio, but the live vaccinated kids are not dying of other things as fast. So she said, so the live vaccine is what you should get. You can imagine lawyers saying, no, do the dead vaccine, right? You can imagine a reason. And it took me probably 3 years into COVID, long after I realized that they were vaccinating everyone to death. It clicked that that's not the story. The story is that the dead vaccine was hurting the immune system, and they were inferring that the live vaccine was imparting immunity to other things, whereas it's actually the dead vaccine, I think, is probably eroding your immune system to these other ailments. And you wouldn't be able to distinguish those two phenomena. You just know one group died more than the other. And so
right.
I'm fairly comfortable stating that the vaccine did more damage than good. I understand why people did it. I did it. I didn't want to lose my job. They said, vax or quit.
Yeah.
And I had friends say, fight it. I was in a doc Zoom group with every anti-vaxxer on the planet. You name them, we've seen them through this doctor Zoom group. And I said, look, when I got the vax, it was a theory that it could hurt you. And I knew that. I'd read about vaccines. There's whole books written on how hard it is to make a vaccine. That's been kept secret too, is that the Army has tons of vaccines they can't use because it kills people. But it's like, what do you say to your wife? You say, look, I'm not going to get vaccinated, therefore I'm going to lose my job. And I'm a huge breadwinner compared to my two kids. One's a musician, the other's doing fine, but I make more than the two combined.
Right.
And on a theory that I might be hurt by a vaccine, right? And so you can imagine 4 years later, the vaccine saved the world and I'm jobless, right? How do you explain that to your wife, right? So I decided to go with the program. I said, okay, don't fight this one, Dave. I waited. Mm-hmm. And there was no evidence surfacing that it was hurting people. It turns out there was plenty and they just buried it. I think we're going to have problems for decades. If not, we might have actually genetically engineered the entire human race at some level. It's gotten into our DNA, I think. And the Doc Zoom group smelled that early. They really got into that. They had virologists. They had very smart people coming through. And so that gets us to a deeper, darker question as to why do people do stuff like that? Right? What motivates? And I don't think it's money, right? The guys who do this stuff, they don't need more money. These are not people who are working at the 7-Eleven trying to figure out how to double their pay. And so it's about power, it's about ego, it's about sociopathy, which is a minimum requirement to let these kind of decisions get made the way they get made. It gets then deeper and darker. I dug into Ukraine. I'm about to watch Jeff Sachs be interviewed by Tucker Carlson. I'm a big Jeff Sachs fan. And Jeff was fighting a two-front war. Jeff is a famous economist from Columbia who is geopolitically connected. So when the Soviet Union fell, everyone was saying to Sachs, what's going to happen? Sachs was the go-to guy. And I've had a few exchanges with him. And Sachs is honest, outspoken, and oddly naive. And so I think he tends to believe things when people tell him. And so he was simultaneously battling against the war in Ukraine while chairing the committee to ascertain whether the COVID virus came from a lab. His committee had been stacked with guys like Peter Daszak and various players. And he said it took him a calendar year to realize that Daszak and these guys were lying their asses off to him. Now, that's the naive part. I think people who are a little more doubting of human nature would say, wait a minute, something's not adding up with this guy Daszak. I think Daszak should probably be tried for murder and hung from the neck until dead. I mean, there's a bunch of people who I would do that with. I think there's
Dave,
treasonous people all over the world.
Just for our listeners, can you give them the nutshell sort of description of who Daszak is?
Daszak's the guy who I believe created the virus, and he certainly helped fund it. It's a bioweapons program, so in that sense, maybe it's not treasonous because he worked for the U.S. government, but he was funneling hundreds of millions into Wuhan. Ralph Barrick from North Carolina was part of the brains of the operation. The virus and the vaccine were known years before the epidemic. you can track the vaccine and the virus back through the patent literature. David Martin, who's a very smart guy, has done he's a patent expert, and he's done his work on that. Every last anti-vaxxer that I know, and I can, when I watched Johnson receive testimony in Senate hearings, I personally knew half the people testifying by the time they got to the Senate, right? And so it really was a connected group. They all have gone from being doctors and virologists to anti-authoritarian New World Order opponent type guys. They've all gone super dark on the world that they're facing. Yeah. So.
Wow. Okay. So the answer is yes, you have looked into it further.
Yes, I have looked into it. I've written hundreds of pages on it. I mean,
yeah. Oh, you have? Is that part of
that annual review that I write?
Review? Okay.
And I've dug deeply into the Ukraine war, and I nailed that. That might have been the best call I've ever made. As soon as the war was brewing in Ukraine, I dug in, and I was the guy who couldn't find Ukraine on a map. Mm-hmm. And I said, okay, let's figure this one out. And I found about 50 guys who were trying to really understand what was happening and why it was happening. And it's clear to me that the war in Ukraine is 100% NATO. It's not Putin at all. It's not even close to Putin. It would be the equivalent if we were blamed, if the Russians put a bunch of armed citizens in Mexico and we went in and flattened them and said, sorry, you can't do that. For 10 years, Putin begged us, don't do this. For 10 years, he said, you can't have Ukraine. They didn't want Ukraine. They couldn't let us get Ukraine. For them, Ukraine was everything. It was the gateway to Russia. Putin over and over and over told them, you can't have Ukraine. What did they do? They went for Ukraine. Why? I don't know. But if it causes World War III, if I'm wandering this dystopian world, I'm going to go find some of those guys and finish them off. The things that they've done. 500,000 dead Ukrainians are our fault. And I'm a Reagan Republican. This is not some lefty wussy stuff.
Okay, so just to be clear on this, you're suggesting that what are you saying exactly? That NATO wanted Ukraine, wanted war, and
NATO wants war.
But Russia invaded Ukraine, right?
Right.
So are you saying NATO somehow
just
provoked Russia? Okay.
I mean, he had to. It was his best play by then. So you go all the way back. Soviet Union falls apart. Mm-hmm. We're negotiating with Russia. Germany's talking about unifying. Everyone knows a unified Germany has not worked well in the past.
Yeah.
Right? 2 world wars with a unified Germany. Russia was really troubled by Germany. I'm not sure the rest of Europe wasn't also troubled. So we negotiated with Russia. We said, look, Soviet Union falls apart. We're negotiating with Gorbachev. Our high command all promised repeatedly, look, we won't move NATO into the Warsaw Pact countries if you don't try to take them back. And Russia said, fine. And then we immediately set into motion plans to move NATO into the Warsaw Pact. The first move was under Clinton, 97. And we've moved NATO's borders right to the edge of Russia. And Russia kept saying, you can't do this, you can't do this. We kept doing it. We armed Nazis in Ukraine starting in 2012, I think it was, after tipping over a pro-Russian elected government. We tipped over the government, installed our guy, and then we started arming the Nazis. Why? Well, it turns out they were the toughest bastard in Ukraine. We said those are the guys we're going to work with. Now, I'm not calling them Nazis metaphorically. These are guys who are direct lineage of the Nazis who fought Russia during World War II. These are guys who celebrate famous Nazis' birthdays. These are real Nazis. These are swastika-toting Nazis. Now, not a big number, nor are the cartel heads in Mexico a big number, but we know what that does to Mexico. So NATO and Lindsey Graham and John McCain, they all armed Ukraine. Putin kept saying, you really have to stop this. We didn't. We pushed him to the edge. All we had to do is say, look, here's the deal. We won't bring Ukraine into Russia. And Putin would have said, we won't therefore have to move troops into Russia. He moved 50,000 troops into Russia. You couldn't take over New York City with 50,000 troops.
Into Ukraine or to the border?
Ukraine, excuse me, into Ukraine. Into Ukraine.
Right.
It was a police force. Why? Because ethnic sort of Nazis had been slaughtering ethnic Russians in the eastern region of Ukraine for years. Estimated 15,000 slaughtered ethnic Russians in Ukraine. It was starting to pick up. Putin actually had to move fast because it was starting to pick up. We wanted Putin to invade because then we could say, we got you. And then what have we done? We've killed 500,000 Ukrainians. They have no men left to fight because we wanted a war with Russia. Zelensky tried to go to the negotiating table in March of 2022. Boris Johnson shows up. Don't even think about it. Two things. One is the money will stop flowing into your pockets. And two, will pop your ass. Very simple. So Zelensky said, okay. So Zelensky has continued to pretend to fight the war. The Ukrainians have lost the whole way. There were periods where it looked like the Russians were not making good ground, but that's because they underestimated NATO's willingness to get into it up to their asses. So then Putin said, okay, if you want to play this way, we can play. Putin did not want to destroy Ukraine's infrastructure. They did not want to kill Ukraine. The early footage of the Ukrainian war, I kept saying to my wife, this is what tipped me off. The early footage, I go, this is not a war. You want to see a war, go look at films of Baghdad, day one, right? That's a war. That's what a modern war would look like. They would go look at Gaza Strip, which, by the way, I don't get into, but go watch the Gaza Strip, right? And those are wars. Russia moved basically the equivalent of UN troop type men into Ukraine to try to get control of a problem. Now, the idea that Putin wants to take over all of Europe is a fabrication. That's just Western propaganda. Maybe he does. There's not a shred of evidence. He once said, the thing that gets used against him is he once said the biggest disaster was when the Soviet Union collapsed. It turns out the most famous Cold Warrior in the United States, George Kennan, said the same thing. We were negotiating with Gorbachev before it collapsed to try to keep it from going unstable. But then as collapses occur, as you know, in equities, as you know, in finance, right. Once a collapse starts, it tends to cascade.
Yeah.
So George Kennan referred to us moving into NATO in 97. Now, he's the most famous Cold Warrior. He said it was the biggest geopolitical policy disaster in U.S. history. So now we get told this. No. Us moving into moving NATO eastward. The collapse was a disaster too, though, because it left a bunch of countries rudderless. Mm-hmm. If it could have been done more systematically, sort of unwound like our banking system, things that the story, right? If you don't unwind it systematically, you unwind it catastrophically. Yeah. And so Putin was accused of wanting to take over Europe, saying because the Soviet Union, it was the biggest disaster. What they leave off when they show that quote is the next sentence in which he said it left a bunch of countries rudderless.
Right. As is often the case. Now, no matter how bad you think it is, whatever follows it is never great either. So,
like revolutions, there's one or two revolutions that ended up working out pretty well, and the rest end up disastrous.
Exactly. Yeah. We hit the lottery in the United States on revolutions. We are
that's the one good one. That's right.
We're the overwhelming lottery
study.
winner. Yeah.
And by the way, anyone who's sitting there thinking, "Oh, you're not, red-blooded American," America. I don't know if you read human history, there's no such thing as the good guys, right?
No.
It's brutal. It's brutal. It's brutal.
It is.
I'm just finishing Victor Davis Hanson's book on collapsed empires. But we've never supported democracies. We support existing democracies because that's kind of the best play, right? You don't knock off Germany as a democratic state, right? But
Right.
as a geopolitical strategic move, it is a lot easier to control one guy wearing a white suit, sunglasses, and a cigar hanging out of his mouth
Right.
than to control a democracy. Democracies are awkward and ugly and inefficient, and it's the wisdom of crowds. But you don't get to control a democracy. We can bribe Noriega. We can bribe cartel heads. We can say, look, we'll bribe you by saying we're not going to cap your ass if you're not on our team, right? But we can't do it with democracies. There's a book called Overthrow by, I think it's Stephen Kinzer. It's about 13 overthrows done by the United States. He said, by the way, there's many more where the U.S. fingerprints are all over it. These are 13 where we went down and did it. And we went over and did it. And we don't install democracies. We never do.
That's dark. But
it's
honestly,
very dark.
I'm not necessarily an enormous fan of the idea of two wolves and a sheep voting on what's for lunch either. So
that's exactly right. I always like that one.
Yeah, but it's it's lesser of evils is what it winds up being.
Oh, I support democracy.
Yeah.
I would like to see a popular vote instead of an electoral vote. There could be problems with it.
Sure.
I understand why they put in the electoral college. No, I support democracy. I just don't think we as a nation do. I don't know who's calling the shots. We got Biden, who I understand why people hate Trump. If you hate Trump and you want to vote for Biden, you must at least acknowledge that he doesn't have a marble left in his skull.
Right.
He is completely pathologic.
Right.
And so if you can admit that and say, I'm choosing that over Trump, then I say, okay, so I get it. I'm stunned because
Sure.
it's dangerous.
But is it really? I mean, is there any meaningful difference? Like when I look at these candidates and I look back at the presidents during my lifetime, I'm like Trump, Biden, Obama, Clinton, Bush, both Bushes, Reagan, Carter, Ford, whoever, Nixon, whoever. I mean,
they're all part of a machine.
Yeah,
they're all part of a machine.
Like I've come to the belief that if you can be elected president, there's no way you're the good guy for the job. There's no way. I mean, it's.
But here's the problem with Biden. And Glenn Greenwald wrote about this. He's dead right. You need one guy at the top. So imagine the Cuban Missile Crisis without Kennedy.
Yeah.
Imagine that people sitting around a table discussing it came up with a consensus of what to do without Kennedy there to say, here's what we're going to do.
Sure.
They would have started World War III. No question. Imagine, so here's the problem. I can look at every president going backwards, including Trump, who would call the shot. Maybe well, maybe poorly, but he would call the shot. If you don't have a central leader where the buck stops at the top and he says, okay, I've heard everything you guys have to say, here's what we got to do, you're in a very dangerous situation. You're now being run by committee, and committees don't work well. So Biden is the first president where we don't know who's driving the cab. Obama could have called the shot. Yeah. I'm confident that if Obama was presented with a do or die situation, that the guy had the chops to do it. Bush Jr., I don't think was calling the shots, but I think Cheney had the chops to do it.
I see. So in other words, we're in the situation we're in. We have created, or it has been created. Somebody has created this large central power, which I would say is the primary problem. Getting your hands on that kind of power is just not anything that will turn out well over the long term. Given that situation, though, you got to have somebody who's all there, and Trump's more all there than Biden.
Oh, but clearly,
clearly.
You can hate the decision you think he would make,
right?
But we actually have 4 years of Trump and 4 years of Biden. I got to tell you, I don't think you have to be a MAGA guy to notice that Trump's. When I pulled the lever on Trump, I mean, Trump was such an idiosyncratic character, right?
Yeah.
And when I pulled the lever on Trump with hands shaking, this guy's a wackadoodle. Yeah. There was one central issue that allowed me to say I'm going with Trump, and that is I believed he would not get us in wars.
Right.
I believed he would negotiate.
Yeah.
And he didn't get us in wars.
Right.
I don't like some of the things he did. I don't blame him for things he didn't achieve because he's in a constant battle the whole way. The constant battle without a political machine.
Just to stay in
him.
office. Yeah, just to stay in office. That's right.
Just to stay. But the Russia collusion, which I called early, I wrote about that one too. That was clearly a farce. But the problem is you can see Republicans who sort of pretend to be with him. Mm-hmm. I bet you wouldn't be willing to name one. You'd say, I would bet my life they have his back.
No. Yeah, I don't
maybe
really know.
Someone, maybe Marjorie Taylor Greene, maybe someone like that. But you'd be hard pressed to name one who wouldn't switch teams fast.
Really? So not generally the so-called Freedom Caucus. I forget who they all are. Matt Gaetz.
Gaetz is a maybe.
Yeah.
But these are minor players, just like the Tea Party, right? They get absorbed back into the system as soon as they get outside the system. Mm-hmm. And so I don't think we can elect our way out of this. I do think I'd rather have Trump in there than Biden. And here's my optimism on Trump. He knows where the spoons and the forks are now, right? He went into office. He didn't think he was going to win. He wasn't ready. There's a law that says you are by law required to prepare for the presidency if you are in the running. And the reason I think that law was passed is so that people had the political cover to prepare a cabinet, to prepare for the presidency without being accused of being presumptuous. Mm. And Trump couldn't trust anyone, which he ended up forcing him to surround himself with family. And that was a very weak cabinet because no one's going to tell the Donald what to do, right? No one's going to stand up to him. He had Bannon. Bannon was solid, I think. But now he knows, I think he probably knows who he can trust. I also think the phrase I invented, I believe, is he's weaponized narcissism. He used to want his name on every building. I think he realizes the ultimate is to be a great president. Yeah. And I think he now realizes to be a great president, he has to do great things.
Yeah, great.
And so I think
I would say great in quotes.
Well, yeah, but what he perceives to be great. Right. Well, but for example, get control of the immigration. Yeah. He now knows he has to get control of the immigration. He now knows he has to get us out of wars. He would get us out of Ukraine.
That is one thing I truly believe. Yeah, I do believe that about him.
We wouldn't have been in Ukraine. We wouldn't have been there. No. We wouldn't have been in Ukraine if he was president.
Right. No,
if something good could come from the narcissism, this will be.
That's right.
I think I think a lot of people are kind of thinking the same way. Like if they might not be saying it, but it's
cowards
breaking down these two guys. Like it's.
So do you think Trump is patriotic?
To a fault. Yeah, absolutely. I think he loves this country.
Do you think Biden is? Do you think Biden is?
That's dicey. I don't know. I don't see
Zero.
him as see him as patriotic.
Zero.
I see him as part of a movement that wants to dismantle the real key core values that make America.
Well, that's not patriotic, right? That's not patriotic then.
No.
So that's a zero.
Yeah.
Right. So then the question becomes why? Why? Yeah. Does it bother you that you see things happening all over the world that don't make sense at the most fundamental level? For example, leaving the border open. There is no case for leaving that border open that way.
Well, there's certainly no case for leaving the border open and running a massive welfare state at the same time.
That's right.
That's right.
And by the way, I've had chats with ex-border guards. They say, we used to stop people at the border who were risky. Mm-hmm. We used to be able to control the flow. And he says they're letting so many guys through who are so dangerous. What odds do you put on it that at some point in our future, a bunch of characters who came across that border do some serious terrorism? What odds do you put on that?
I think it's a certainty. Look, it's a certainty.
Right.
We know it's like the suitcase bomb certainty. We know it's a certainty.
That's right.
You know, at some point, somebody's going to set off a suitcase bomb in some major city. It's going to happen.
So leaving the border open then is treasonous.
Yeah, I mean, I'm
I don't know what the definition of treason is.
I don't either.
It doesn't.
But to do all this, to have this conversation, I'm accepting a whole context that I don't normally operate in. Where normally my viewpoint is just, if you follow me on Twitter, you know I'm just like, the problem is the existence of this size, the sheer size and scope of this amount of centralized power. That's the problem, and it all stems from there. And you know, God bless him if Trump can take one step, forward in the right direction. God bless him for it. But in the end, do I believe that the government will shrink, that power will shrink at all under his a time as president?
No, it won't.
It won't.
No, it won't. It won't. So that gets to the question of, therefore, are we heading off a cliff?
Well, yeah, we're headed the way of all empires. We're headed the way of all empires.
Okay, let me ask you. Let me put it in. Are we going to be alive to witness it?
Okay, that is a better question, isn't it? I'm 62. And
I'm 69.
Yeah, so same ballpark, and I've got pretty good genetic material. Dad was 96, Mom was 93. I think things, by the time I'm ready to kiss it all goodbye, I think things could be really a lot different. Do you think
we'll be better off in 10 years from now?
That's a great question, Dave, because I think my standard of living will be higher. I really do. My standard of living has just...
Is that because of you, though? What about the average standard of living within the United States?
Okay, within the United States is a different question. Globally, it's absolutely unequivocally higher. I mean, there are fewer people as a percent of the population in what we would call dire poverty, right? It used to be most of it, and now it's not.
So let me give you my 40-year bear market case then.
Oh, okay. This is a different question for me, and I'm probably there.
This is bad news for me, by the way.
It is.
Maybe yes, maybe no.
If you press me, I'll say, like a 30-year sideways market, a la Japan. I've been talking about this for 3 years solidly. So, but go ahead. Your 40-year bear market.
Then the country won't be better off.
I don't think the country will be better off. See, we talk about country and government and standards of living, and it's hard for me to generalize to that degree about something so large and complex as the lives of hundreds of millions of people over a great area. But I get the point. Do I think the government will be worse?
So here's the Rubicon
Yes.
I've crossed.
Okay.
Here's not just the government, but quality of life. And the Rubicon I've crossed is I think I was able to stand back and look at the various catastrophes and the bizarre behaviors and stuff like that. And I had this great faith that I, Mr. Smarty Pants, would somehow be able to stay above it. And I no longer think that. I'm not convinced I know how to stay out of the shooting range. And so I think it's just inflation alone is going to be so hard to fight.
Yep.
And you can say, well, I'm going to hedge against it. When you're hedging against something like inflation, it's you got to be really good at it. You got to be really good at it. And so the 40-year bear market in 1981. This is a combination of ideas from a combination of people, including some of my own. In 1981, we were demographically on the cusp of greatness. The boomers were just really starting to pick up speed. They brought their wives to the workplace. We cranked demographically. The economists all say that's the whole ballgame. It's not the whole ballgame, but it's a big part of the story. If you've got a young, productive population. Mm-hmm. In 1981, the price-earnings ratio, which they're so cooked, they're ridiculous, but let's just pretend like it's real. In 81, it might have been real. Was 6. on the market.
Mm-hmm.
The bond market was priced terribly. The stock market was priced terribly. In 1981, China was coming out of the dark ages, and for the next 40 years, sold goods made by slave labor at the cheapest imaginable price. In 1981, Russia, the Soviet Union had not yet collapsed. Well, we were already helping them get resources out of the ground and flood the world with Russian resources and other countries and things like that. So there was this sort of resource boom that left oil dirt cheap 20 years later. Mm-hmm. During that period, the market valuations climbed. In 1981, interest rates at 16%, over the next 40 years dropped to zero, which is insanity. You know, Edward Chancellor says you get below 2%, you will have a crisis. We got to zero. Europe, they got to negative, ridiculous, and negative real interest rates, seriously negative real interest rates. Mm-hmm. And so we had tailwind after tailwind after tailwind after tailwind. Yep. Which of those tailwinds can possibly repeat over the next 40 years? The answer is none. None. We will not find another China to do what it did. We will not find interest rates going from 16 to zero. By the way, Buffett, who gets misinterpreted and misquoted all the time, wrote a 1999 Fortune article that basically said, everything is about interest rates. He says, if you look at the bear market from 67 to 81, rates were going up. If you look at the bull market from 81 to 99, rates were going down. Mm-hmm. He said the GDP, the real GDP from 67 to 81 grew faster than the GDP from 81 to 99.
I remember
it's not
that article
the GDP.
well. Yep.
I've read that article probably 8 times.
Yep.
He says dropping rates are bullish. What the market turned that into is low rates are bullish. No, low rates are bearish because there's nowhere to go but up. Yep. So are we at the end of a 40-year credit cycle? And the answer is probably yes. Yeah. We sure as heck are not at the beginning of a 40-year interest rate drop. That we know. Yeah. And so then the question, with all those repeating, what happened? Well, with all those working together, the valuations of the market, which I know you know, but I'm going to say it in case your audience doesn't know it completely.
Sure.
The valuations of the market is not the price of the market. It's the price of the market divided by a metric that the market ought to track. Whether it's earnings, revenue, book value, Tobin's Q, I follow about 25 of them. The market valuation should flutter around, and from 1880 to 1990, they just wobble back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and gave an average market valuation, well defined.
Yep.
In about 1994, and the question is why in 94 the valuations took off. From 1981, they were already overvalued. The market was already overvalued in 94. It was about 50% overvalued in 94. But they left the zone in 94. They broke out of this 110-year channelingsuccess.com sort of zone and took off, never to look back. You say, oh yes, they look back. In 2009 at the low, the market spent about 1 month below historical average fair value, about a month. That's not a deep correction at all. That's regressing to the mean, not through the mean. So during that 40-year period, the market valuations, which shouldn't move, they should move around, but there should be no trend, compounded 3% a year. That's a 3% tailwind, which will at some point turn into a 3% headwind when they compound at negative 3% a year to get back to cheap.
Right.
Now, some people say, well, they'll never get cheap again. Oh, please. Name an asset class that got expensive that didn't regress back through the mean. And the answer is there are none.
Right. And the E in that PE
it has never happened in history.
Yeah. The E in that PE
never happened in history.
As Grantham likes to say, is the most mean reverting series in finance.
And profit margins is the most mean reverting series.
Margins,
NVIDIA's
margins, yeah.
NVIDIA's now what is I think is going to soon start to be called the Mag 1 because it's ruling the entire market. NVIDIA.
Right. Yeah,
That's right.
I think we're there.
Has a
yeah.
has a PE of 100.
Yeah.
And has a profit margin of around 85%.
Right.
Now that will mean revert because competition will show up and AI. I'm not convinced AI is good news. I can see advantages to AI, but I can see disadvantages that could far outweigh the advantages. And so I'm not a big fan of AI at all.
Well, and just as
And so
I have no reason to believe it's not like every other new technology. I have no reason to believe that, it's not essentially we're at manic levels about it here.
But the internet looked great. The internet looked great.
It did, and it was, and it is. But there was still a huge bear market, and most of those
AI doesn't look great to me. AI doesn't look great to me.
Oh, I see. AI does not look overall.
No,
doesn't look anything like the internet to you.
No. I think it's a great risk of filling the great internet with total debris. Total debris.
Right.
When
Fakes
AI starts
and-
scraping
sure.
AI, you start getting nonsense. You start getting total nonsense. When, would you be happy if you never, ever, ever saw another AI generated piece of art?
Yes.
Every article has AI art in it because people are too lazy to actually create.
Yeah.
So AI is at great risk of taking the human element out of everything. Is that a win?
Is it really though? Can it really?
It is.
I don't know. I don't know that I agree. I don't think that I agree that that you can ever remove that element. It's similar to there's this sci-fi series called Three Body Problem, and at some point
I'm watching it right now.
Okay.
For the second time.
Well, let's see. I'm gonna spoil it for you, but for the second time. Okay, no spoiler then. And
no
and
spoiler.
at one point,
Second time.
At one point, late in the first season, which I think there's only one season at this point, at late in the season, somebody says, "You know something? These aliens know everything about us because they're watching everything we
But
do.
we
Their
have our
technology.
head. We
we
have
have
what's
what's in
up
our
here.
head, right?
I know.
They
I know.
can't get in there. That's
Well-
the one thing. And I don't think.
Well,
AI
let me
can get
point
in there.
out. Let me point out that people across the Soviet Union knew that it was bad, knew that the leadership was bad. It still lasted 70 years.
Right. Right. People look.
So just because
people
just
tolerate
because
a
you
lot. That's right.
know,
Yeah.
just because you know doesn't mean it's not going to suck. There's a name for it where you reach a point where you just concede that you can't fix it. There's an actual name for that, and I can't remember what it was. But there's a point where you just reach a point where it's just this fatality. This you accept your doom.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
with
that's what
AI,
happens in
with AI, it's something I've been thinking about too. With just creating, like content or research or whatever, and I don't think that the ability for original thought doesn't go away, but it seems like AI amplifies whatever is out there first or the most popular.
So far, Dave, the generative AI output, if you ask it to write anything, it's shit. It's crap.
Yeah,
I know.
I mean,
unless you're reading stuff you don't know is AI.
I guess
There's a bit on Twitter. There's a tweet today where it shows this chick, and the person asks, "Is she fat?" And she looks phenomenal, but she's got these massive hips, and you're going, "Holy shit!" She's like hot from like waist up, and then these massive hips, and I'm going, "Oh, she's so out of proportion." Then someone said, "Oh, that's an AI fake." The human creative spirit could be drowned by the debris. When I search the scientific literature, I can't find stuff now. I can't find it.
Yeah.
And the scientific literature isn't using AI to clutter itself. It's just getting more and more cluttered.
So maybe we'll live less of our lives, or try to live less of our lives online then. Maybe we'll
true.
get out and see the world. Maybe we'll touch grass, as the saying goes.
But you got guys who saying with AI, we don't need to vote because AI can predict who's going to win anyways. And boy, these are Rubicons, right? These are Rubicons.
Yeah.
So and then the other dark place. I hit a darker place last week than I've ever hit actually. But I'm chasing the pedophile story, the
Mm.
Epstein, but below the surface. So everyone knows Jeffrey Epstein was working for Mossad, probably CIA, blackmailing the hell out of everyone. So if you want to know why we're leaving the border open, you want to know why we're sending money to Ukraine, all you have to do is say who's compromised. And the answer is clearly Biden.
Mm-hmm.
Right? The minute you are married and you're in Congress, you have sex with some bimbo, you're compromised. And the next thing you know, you're more compromised. And pretty soon, you just can't not do it. And then even if you're not compromised, your best friend says, by the way, they're going to put out a picture of me with a 5-year-old in bed. If you don't vote this way, you can't do this to me, right? So I think all of politics is compromised. But I look at people do things that seems to be so against the most fundamental principles of the United States and ask why. What black hole force out there in the universe is drawing out these kind of actions that don't
I don't
make
need them.
sense
I don't
to
need
me?
them to be compromised to come up with that, Dave. I mean, come on. If somebody comes to the country from, wherever half of them are from now, and gets elected to Congress and has a whole different set of values and a whole different, religion that a lot of folks in the country don't have, or philosophy that a lot of folks in the country, I don't even need the compromise to get there.
Right, but you can look at the people in Congress now who don't fit that description, who look compromised. Right. They support things that don't make sense, and so one of my theses is that this global pedophile ring is way darker and deeper than Epstein. Now, let me give you some stats that seem uncontested. They say that over 1 million kids a year are trafficked. Right?
Yeah,
that's a big ass number.
Heard it.
Let's say it's an exaggeration. Let's say it's only 500,000. That's 500,000 kids a year who are trafficked. Have you ever seen anything about who's receiving these children?
No.
Can you name?
Yeah.
Now, they're not going to trailer parks. Guys in trailer parks can't afford trafficked children.
No.
These are not going to guys with vans with free candy painted on the side.
No.
So it turns out when you dig into this world, you find some unbelievably bizarre stuff. You'll find yourself in a Zoom call with Archbishop Vigano, who has actually spilled his guts on the Catholic Church, saying that the leaders of the world are all compromised by pedophilia.
Whoa.
Personally in a Zoom call. You find that I'm on a Zoom call with a Department of Defense case officer, an intel case officer, who I'm fact-checking the whole way. 2-hour Zoom call, I'm fact-checking to make sure this guy's not bullshit. He's not bullshit, he's real. And I've gotten even more information about him. And I communicate with him casually. And at the very end of the call, I said, I'm interested in the role of pedophilia in geopolitics, Tony. And Tony says, he starts talking about Epstein. I said, no, I don't care about Epstein. We all kind of understand it, and it's a profound problem, right? Clinton was compromised. Ehud Barak was compromised. They were all compromised. And we've just kind of gotten by that somehow. But I said, I'm interested in the darker stuff that no one's talking about. And I said, let me ask you a simple question. Is the Clinton Foundation trafficking children? And he said, oh, absolutely. Well, now, how many people listening to this call didn't just soil their underwear?
Yeah.
Now, I know for a fact the Clinton Foundation's trafficking children. I knew it. But when he said absolutely, I just said, okay. That was almost a test for him. So then one day, I'm talking to this guy. On Twitter, I put something out about him. And some guy jumped in and started hammering him. And they go back and forth. And they're throwing grenades at each other on Twitter. And I go, what did I just trigger here? And it was a journalist of some kind. And so I DM'd this guy, this Intel guy. I have several Intel connections on Twitter that people don't even know who they are. And I've had lunch with them and stuff like that. And I said, sorry to drag you into that. You guys obviously have a history. He said, yeah, it was about Bo Bergdahl. You know, Bergdahl, the guy who walked off the base and joined the Taliban. And then we lost some Navy SEALs trying to retrieve him. And was he a spy? Was he a traitor? You know, very scandalous thing. And I said, sorry to do this to you. He said, he says, he's pissed off. He wants more information out of me. He he was trying to get me to spill some more guts because he knows I know stuff he doesn't know and he wants it bad. And he says, what he doesn't know is I was this lead negotiator trying to get Bergdollar out of goddamn that territory. And I'm sitting there going, holy shit.
Yeah.
So when he said yes, the Clinton Foundation traffics children. Famous people traffic children. 1 million kids are getting trafficked. And until you can tell me where those 1 million kids are going, you haven't begun to understand that problem.
Yeah.
And what I'll tell you is there's some famous scandals that got out of control that are kind of Rosetta Stones to this story. Like one's called the Franklin scandal. Highly connected Republican operative. The whole thing unfolded. What's instructive about it is a bunch of these kids as adults came out and spilled their guts. And these are fractured personalities. These are people they're crackheads, they're prostitutes, they're multiple personalities. Some of them have pieced their lives back together, but they spilled their guts. And concerned citizens hired a private investigator who died in a plane crash, right? That sort of thing, right?
Right.
But the story unraveled. What was telling was the FBI came in and squashed it like a bug. The courts, one of the women ended up in the Nebraska Supreme Court on her case. The judge who was put in charge was not he was not allowed to be a Supreme Court justice. They put him in there anyways. Between the prosecutor and the judge, they destroyed the case. It's a real unbelievably telling story. What it showed you is when one of these cases really is at risk of going public, the firepower that is brought to bear to shut it down is unbelievable.
Yeah, I wouldn't doubt it. All right. On that dark, dark note, I'm going to ask you
There's a darker one.
Yeah.
There's a darker one. The darker one is the poles are moving quickly. The magnetic poles are moving quickly.
Really?
When the poles move, every 6,000 years they move.
Right.
Every other 6,000 years when they move, you get the magnetic field protects us from solar radiation. Mm-hmm. When the poles reverse, we're unprotected. And they're moving fast now. They're moving fast in our lifetime fast.
Wow, I haven't heard a syllable about
And
this.
so you got I had heard about it, but I hadn't paid attention. But you know that Aurora Borealis shit last week? That unprecedented, there's a reason why we got unprecedented Aurora Borealis.
Wow.
And when the poles move, or the magnetic field doesn't shield us from the cosmic rays that hit the Earth. And the worst event known to humans so far occurred in 1859. It's called the Carrington event, where we got a burst, sunspot, fried the entire telegraph system. Yep. Fried it. The telegraph system's probably 1/4-inch copper back then.
Yeah.
Our microcircuitry will be scorched if that happens.
All right.
Okay.
Now we'll have no choice but to touch grass, because that's all it'll be left, if that. So on that dark note,
actually.
Yeah. On that dark note, I do want to ask you my final question, which is the same for every guest, even when we don't talk about finance so much, like in this interview. And it's you've answered it before. I hope you don't remember it, because it works better that way. But the final question is, and if you've said it already, feel free to repeat it. That's the other thing. You don't have to make up something if you said it. And the question is simply, if you could leave our listeners with a single thought today, what would you like it to be?
It's age dependent. If you're young, if you're in your 20s, don't go down these deep rabbit holes. You have to build a life. You have to build robots. You have to do all sorts of cool stuff. If you go down these rabbit holes, you'll have trouble coping. If I went down these rabbit holes I go down when I was 25 years old, I would not have achieved what I achieved. So don't go down these rabbit holes. Let the old guys hike up their pants to their chests and bitch about the government. You go do your thing. To the same young group, you save for retirement, you invest to hedge inflation. Don't think you're gonna get rich, but you have to save. And I even saved net savings the years my kids were in college. And I saved, crudely speaking, probably 25% of my gross salary.
Wow.
And that's how you get to retirement safely. Don't use college savings plans. I understand how college financial aid works. The goal is to look broke when your kids get to college age. Mm-hmm. If you have these college saving plans, you don't look broke. In fact, your best bet is to give all your money to your parents and have them give it back later. That would make you look broke.
There you go.
And then to the older people, God Sod said it. There's a lot of things that really trouble you, but you don't want to say anything because of you have your reason. Because I'll be criticized, I'll be this, I'll be that, I'll be fired, whatever. He said, find a way to speak up. Don't be a coward. He has to go around the country with an armed guard. His wife walks 5 feet behind him, watching for trouble. She just watches him. She walks behind him. And he says, if I can do this, you can speak up. And so if you see a wrong, one thing I've never, for some reason, I'm a natural contrarian. I've never been afraid to be against the crowd. In fact, I relish it for some reason. So when I write about stories in which the crowd is all going one way, and I think the story might be the other way. Don't be afraid to be alone, yelling in the forest. Don't be afraid to speak up. And if I didn't do it, but 2 days ago, POTUS put out this teary-eyed thing about how George Floyd's life was snuffed in its early stages, and we lost so much. And I go, George Floyd was one of the skankiest bastards on the planet. Shut up, right? And at my age, I can do this. On a campus, you say, well, if someone gets a hold of this, I'm in trouble. Screw you. I'm fighting to the death on this one, right? You want to cancel me? We're going to war. We're going to war. They've tried. They've tried multiple times. The next one's going to be ugly. Unless I reach out to Cornell and say, hey, if you shut up and I shut up, this will go away. Are you okay with that? And if Cornell's willing to just shut up, then I can just shut up. But if Cornell comes out and again denounces what I said, then I'm going to war with these bastards, and I'm going to make a friggin' stink. And I don't know what topic it'll be. Some will get their underwear in a knot. Speak up. I understand why you don't want to lose your job. I got vaxxed. I didn't want to lose my job. Risk-reward calculations are everywhere. But find a way to speak up with your friends. Just talk to them about how you think climate change is the biggest grift in the history of the world. In the history of the world. And I know science. That is not science that you're witnessing. It's crap.
It is.
And so dig into these things, but don't do it if you're a youngster, because you've got kids to raise and families to feed. And just do your thing.
Well said, Dave. As always, thanks so much. Thanks. It's always a pleasure to talk with you. The conversations resemble nothing like any of our other guests, which I absolutely love. I mean, we're always talking to money managers. It's a financial show. But, there aren't many people who I want to get into these subjects with. In fact, I can name only one, and you're it. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Opinions expressed on this program are solely those of the contributor and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of Stansberry Research, its parent company, or affiliates.